All right, thanks for coming on, everybody. What I want to do tonight is give a kind of general overview of what's been happening recently, where recently is approximately the last year or so. A lot has happened in the world of UFO stuff in the last year, but I don't think one can really understand what it is without its context. So I'm going to try to give quite a lot of context tonight, which means I'm going to go pretty quickly through a lot of stuff. I want to start with our friend Enrico Fermi. He is most famously known for breakthroughs in nuclear physics. But for our purposes, we're going to be talking to him because of this thing called the Fermi paradox that he proposes in 1950. It goes like this. There's billions of sun-like stars in the Milky Way. Many of these have Earth-like planets in the habitable zone. Many of these stars are much older than the sun. Some Earth-like planets could have developed intelligent life long ago. Some of these civilizations may have developed interstellar travel, and the Milky Way galaxy could be completely traversed in a few million years. So the Earth should have already been visited by extraterrestrial civilizations, or at least their probes. However, there's no convincing evidence that this has happened. The reason this is called a paradox is because there are two things that are supposed to be true and which stand in tension with each other. These are Fermi's priors, his background beliefs about astrophysics and the history of the universe, the galaxy in particular, that we live in, which seem to set an expectation that we would see contact with some kind of an extraterrestrial civilization. And then allegedly, the observation is that that has not happened. And a lot has been done in the kind of pop science, philosophy of science world, trying to make sense of this paradox, offering possible explanations of why it is that even though we would expect to see contact, we don't. I do want to note that our priors should have shifted quite a lot over the past couple of weeks, really. We now have this announcement from NASA that the best explanation of these little spots on these rocks in Mars is likely to be microbial life. So they're still hedging their bets a little bit, but generally speaking, the claim is being made that there seems to have been microbial life on Mars at least once upon a time. There's a nice video by Hank Green about this. He generally does a good job at pop science stuff. But I especially like this video because he draws attention to the fact that if once upon a time there was microbial life on Mars, then there's probably still microbial life on Mars. There's a nice video by the Kurzgesagt guys about the deep biosphere on our own planet that we can get all kinds of measurements on. We've discovered that shockingly low below the surface, there are microbial life forms doing quite well. And we still know that there's sufficient warmth and it looks like liquid water under the surface of Mars, that there's probably still life on Mars today. We've also used the James Webb Space Telescope to make a number of observations about exoplanets. And one of the things we've noticed about exoplanet K2-18b is that it seems to have dimethyl sulfide in its atmosphere. Here on Earth, the only thing that creates that is life. So this is some kind of a life signature. So let's just run with this for a minute. Let's just say that in addition to our own planet, we now have substantial evidence that there is life on Mars, or at least once was, and that there is life on K2-18b. That pretty much implies that there's life all over the place. Because we've really just started being able to look, and it looks like we're already getting some early hits. Why might this be the case? Any number of reasons why this might be the case, but I'm particularly fond of this hypothesis from Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist, that once upon a time, at about 10 to 17 million years after the Big Bang, the background radiation of the universe made the mean temperature within what we would call room temperature, or within the range that it needs to be for water to be liquid, which means you wouldn't need to have a planet in order to have liquid water. You could have liquid water everywhere. And if that's true, then it's possible that very early simple forms of life evolved at the very beginning of the universe And then as it unfolds over billions of years, and there are new stars and new planets, and then perhaps more complex forms of life can evolve. But this might kind of serve as a universal seeding of the whole universe. So again, this is the claim that Fermi makes. We have these priors which would lead us to expect extraterrestrial contact, but we don't see it. And of course, what I want to suggest is that he's wrong about this, or at least he's wrong as he states this, that we actually have quite a lot of convincing evidence that this has happened. It's a tricky thing to decide when you're talking about UFO history, how far back to go. I just want to note that this is a very compelling case in 1561 in Nuremberg, Germany, where you see this illustration of objects in the sky. You see a lot of orbs. You see them connected together. You see them alone. You see them associated with various cylinders. You see a large black triangle. You see an impact on the surface with smoke coming up out of it. One could argue that every major element of the UFO phenomenon is present in this illustration in 1561. One could also argue, just for giggles, that we're actually seeing this happen in Denmark literally today. So over the past few weeks, a number of airports have been shut down by things that news reports still predominantly call drones. But the reason I left this in Danish is so that you could see this word at the bottom, Luftobservationer, which they are now using as the term. First, it was called drone activities over critical infrastructure. Now the minister calls it aerial observations. So if you make that unidentified, this is just Danish for UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. But the real place I want to start is right here nearby in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, 1903, as humans take to the sky. If strange things are happening to the sky, it's important that we are getting off the ground and being able to look at them. Of course, the first thing we did with that is kill each other for a long time. But after World War II ended and the world began to stabilize and then kind of destabilize again, something peculiar happened. This is now one of my favorite UFO cases. I'm going to go through a lot of UFO cases. I will not talk about everybody's favorite UFO cases, but I will talk about all of mine and a bunch of the other ones very quickly. But my favorite cases are all going to be marked in the yellow, and I'll give them their own little header. So this is one of my favorites. One of the reasons the magenta recovery is my favorite, or one of my favorites, is because we have a very substantial paper trail. And when I say paper trail, I mean literal paper, which is unusual for this world. So there were a number of memos and telegrams which were given to journalists by an anonymous source named Mr. X. But they have tested the paper that these are on. They've tested the fonts, they've tested the grammar, etc., etc. And it looks like there's fairly substantial reason for believing that these documents are legitimate. In particular, the main person working on this is this guy, Roberto Pinotti. Although I will be borrowing some slides from Paolo, I'll say Gazzardi. And that's what we're going to do here. So all the slides and translations are from Paolo. So this is the first one. By personal order of the Duce, that's the leader, that's Mussolini, absolute silence is ordered on the presumed landing of an unknown aircraft on national soil. The version to be published that circulated with today's dispatch, was presumably earlier, and you do not have a copy of it, is confirmed. The same version also applies to personnel and journalists. Maximum penalty for offenders, up to including appeal to the State Security Court. Please confirm receipt immediately. Shortly thereafter, by superior order, the news disclosed in today's dispatch should be treated as follows. The above-mentioned aircraft has been recognized as a meteor. Don't call it an aircraft anymore. In fact, by personal order of the Duce, it's ordered that the circulation of the news about the craft of unknown nature referred to in today's dispatch be stopped immediately. It is ordered that any leads for newspapers carrying this news be recast immediately. Maximum penalties for offenders up to and including appeal to the state security for it. Something weird happened. Let's talk about it. No, let's say it's a meteor. No, let's not talk about it at all. And if you talk about it at all, you're going to be in trouble. And of course, in Mussolini's Italy, being in trouble is bad. In addition to these memos, we also have these set of instructions which tell us how to do a UFO recovery. Notify the mayor, order the immediate recovery of the aircraft, order immediate arrest of all witnesses, prevent dissemination in the news. Sometimes it might be necessary to publish from time to time very short articles in which the phenomenon is reported to its authentic and unique celestial nature, meteor, shooting star, planet, etc. Do not talk to the academics. Strict exclusion of any other scientific body from the collection and examination before it's available, including the Pontifical University. This collection of letters also contains some other cases. Here's a case in 1936 in which you can see this kind of flying cylinder that looks kind of like a rocket being chased by two flying saucers. I encourage you to look into this case. It's a very fascinating case. UAP Gerb has a really nice video on this in general. UAP Gerb's videos are excellent, so if you're looking for a place to do some deep dives, this is a great place to go. We're going to jump forward in history to 1935. This is Robert Watson Watt. He invented radar. And of course, once we get radar, now we no longer have to be in the sky in order to see things in the sky. We can see things in the sky from the ground. Radar is critical for understanding the UFO phenomenon. The best cases are multi-sensor cases. The best cases are cases where you have radar, eyesight, and some form of video. We have a lot of those cases. Those are the ones I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about that a little more when you get to it. Of course, World War II begins shortly thereafter in 1939. And shortly after that, pilots start seeing things in the skies. They call them foofers. This is from an event called the Battle of Los Angeles, where a number of these strange objects start showing up in the sky. This is an actual photograph of the Battle of Los Angeles. So these are Foo Fighters. It is doctored. It was doctored by the journalists to try to make it look more dramatic. But those are, in fact, UFOs. 1942 to 1947, we get the Manhattan Project, which of course leads to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which brings World War II to an end. The planes that did those bombing runs normally live at Roswell Army Airfield in New Mexico. 1947, just a couple of years after the bombing, we get our first major, generally recognized to be the first UFO case, although, as we've just suggested, not the first UFO case. But this is a pilot, Kenneth Arnold, who's flying around. He sees a number of objects, 5 or 6 of them, that look like this. He says that they look like they're skipping across the water like a saucer. That's actually where the term flying saucer came from, even though this thing does not actually look like a saucer. It looks like a boomerang. Which brings us to probably the most famous of all UFO alien-related events, the Roswell incident. So this is why this is an incident. This is a historical fact, and I'll try to kind of keep clear like where we have fairly well-established history and where we have more speculative history, but I still think worth paying attention to. In general, I'm only trying to use evidence that I suspect is in fact legitimate. So this is the Roswell Army Airfield press release from July 8, 1947. The many rumors regarding the flying discs became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers at the sheriff's office of Chavez County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. That's July 8th. On July 9th, they decided to scapegoat Jesse Marcel, so they gave him a bunch of Mylar weather balloon material, and they said, never mind, it was a weather balloon. But as Jesse grows older and leaves the military and isn't afraid anymore, he starts talking publicly about how General Ramey, used him as a scapegoat to try to distract from what actually happened, but that the original story was true. And in addition to the truth of finding the disc and bringing it in, they found various things like a metal I-beam, which contained these images on it, and they found some bodies. This is some testimony from Miriam Bush, who was working at a local hospital at the time. She says that her boss let her into an examination room where a number of bodies lay on gurneys. At first she cried out, "My God, they're children," but their grayish-brown skin, oversized heads, and those staring eyes told another story. One of them moved. There's other people who claim to have seen these bodies, but this is my favorite story because a friend of mine is her great niece. And so I got to talk to her about the kind of family lore about how Aunt Miriam came home and she was really spooked. And she talked about these weird bodies. And then she went back to work the next day and they threatened her and told her never talk about that again. But of course, they did, just very quietly. The Air Force decided at some point that this story of the weather balloon wasn't sufficient, in particular, probably because it couldn't account for the bodies. So they published a book in 1957 called The Roswell Report. Case closed. Don't think about it anymore. In which they offered a new explanation. The aliens observed in the New Mexico desert were actually anthropomorphic test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research. These are the balloons. This is Project Mogul. Those are allegedly the bodies. That's Operation Hideout. One thing you'll notice right away is that there's 5 years between those two events, and also that the bodies were supposed to be short, approximately the size of children, that the other rumors in the air are that they tried to get very small coffins, and they couldn't find enough of them. What does the Air Force say about this? Air Force activities which occurred over a period of many years have been consolidated and are now represented to have occurred in 2 or 3 days. So these witnesses just forgot that these events were 5 years apart, and they remember them as approximately 2 or 3 days apart instead. There's a lot of coverage out there about the Roswell incident. This is a nice interview with a prominent Roswell scholar that was done by Ross Coulthard a couple weeks ago. If you want to get up to speed, that's a good place to start. Shortly thereafter that, July 26, 1947, President Truman signs the National Security Act. This creates a number of interesting things. Instead of the Army Air Force, we now have Air Force as a distinct military entity. It also creates the Central Intelligence Agency. This is one of those memos that is fairly decent evidence for it. This is the Twining memo. I'll give you some, this is Lieutenant General Twining to the Commander General of the Air Force. He's talking about these peculiar things in the sky, and he says, the phenomenon is something real and not visionary or fictitious. There are objects, probably approximating the shape of a disc, and they appear to be as large as man-made aircraft. They report operating characteristics such as extreme rates of climb, maneuverability, and motion, which must be considered evasive when sighted or contact. They're metallic, they don't leave any trails, they seem to be circular or elliptical. They come in well-kept formations, varying from 3 to 9 objects, and there's no associated sound. One thing we should note about these memos that are occurring in military contexts is this is not propaganda, right? So this is not stuff that was ever intended to see the light of day. The only way we know these things is because they were either leaked at some point or because they became available through Freedom of Information Act requests. And of course, nobody in the 50s had any idea that FOIA was ever going to happen. So there was an assumption that these memos would all be private. Civilians do start getting, in the 50s, their own cameras. This is the kind of first decent UFO photo taken by a civilian. In 1950, we get another well-documented memo. Since July 30th, objects round in form have been sighted over the this is the Atomic Energy Commission plant. Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. This is the first good documented piece of evidence that we see UAP associated with nuclear power. We will see lots of that coming up. This is Lieutenant Colonel Mildren to Major Carlin. Again, this is an internal memo. Lubbock, Texas, there's the fascinating series of events where you get these objects flying in V-shaped formations. You'll notice that they seem to be rearranging, perhaps even being different numbers of them. This is, I still think, my favorite case, the DC flap. So DC, in the summer of 1952, there was a whole bunch of UFO reports, but there was a spike toward the end of July. This is my favorite UFO photograph. This is 1952, Salem, Massachusetts. It was taken by a Coast Guard photographer. It's my favorite because it's clear that something weird is going on, but also because of this. So sometimes people in this world suggest that the U.S. government is running an active disinformation campaign. I claim that we can conclusively prove this because this is a disinformation campaign. I'll explain why. This is an article on Navy.mil, the official Navy Heritage Command website, called U2s, UFOs, and Project Blue Book, which makes it sound like there should be some association between UFOs and Project Blue Book. High-altitude testing of the U-2 soon led to an unexpected side effect, a tremendous increase in reports of UFOs. Once U-2s started flying at altitudes above 60,000 feet, air traffic controllers began receiving increasing numbers of UFO reports. So far, so good. Don't worry about the thing on the left. It's a U-2. Except that's very clearly not a U-2. In fact, it's 4 objects that are definitely not U-2s, and U-2s are spy planes. You don't fly them in formations of 4. And worse than that, this observation was in July 52, and nobody even thought about the U-2 until fall 1953, and it didn't fly until 1955. Of course, military archivists know this, so to put that picture right next to this story is active disinformation. Shortly after that event that I just showed you, the 4 weird things in the sky, you get a bunch of weird things in the sky over the Capitol in Washington, D.C. This is testimony from a radar operator at the time, Harry Barnes. Each sighting coincided with a radar pip we could see near his plane. He's talking about a pilot who he sent out to intercept these radar signatures. When the pilot reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on our scope. Again, very good evidence. The best evidence is the correlation between our radar evidence and our visual observations. We also have ground observers who see this event happen. There's a fun little comic about this, which we get a little more testimony from this person. I can safely deduce that they performed gyrations which no known aircraft could perform. By this, I mean that our scope showed that they could make right-angle turns and complete reversals of flight, nor, in my opinion, could any natural phenomena such as shooting stars, electrical disturbances, or clouds account for these spots on our radar. Not to mention actual visual sightings, of course. If you've got UFOs flying over the Pentagon and showing up on radar and pilots and ground observers seeing them, surely somebody has to say something about this to the public. And they did. Major General Sanford at the Pentagon gave a press briefing, at the time the largest press briefing that the Pentagon had given after World War II. Here's a representative quote. A certain percentage of this volume of reports have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It does not contain any patterned purpose that we can relate to any conceivable threat to the United States. He was the director of intelligence for the Air Force at the time. I want to note that this rhetorical pattern we will see over and over and over again. In fact, we're still seeing it today. If you watch Pentagon officials trying to describe what's happening over New York or over Wright-Patterson or over Denmark or over Germany right now, these airports that are shutting down because of these strange things that they're trying to call drones, what do they say? They basically say the same thing that General Sanford said, which is this. Here's your UFO public relations template. There have been many unusual observations. Most of them we can explain. Some of them are unexplained. We have no conclusive evidence that they're extraterrestrial. Trust us, we're looking into it. Don't worry, there's nothing to be afraid of. This is the rhetoric that you will see in the rest of our talk over and over and over again. Where does it come from? I mean, it kind of looks like it comes from Mussolini. Another reason why I like the 52 wave is because my friend Beatrice Villarreal, who's an astronomer, is doing some work on historical astronomy by taking these photographic plates from places like Palomar Observatory and scanning them into a computer and doing analysis on them. And what she was looking for are what she calls transients. That is, objects which either aren't there and then show up, or are there and then go away. One could imagine any number of reasons why that would be a good astronomy project. Who knows what kinds of celestial phenomena might come and go in a way that we could learn something interesting from. But what she discovered is that she did find transients, but they tend to come in groups. That is, they show up all at once, and then they go away all at once. One of the interesting things about this is happening specifically during the 52 wave. In fact, this is, I believe, just a few days removed from the events that we just talked about with the radar operator. So when you look at the plate, you have these objects that sort of look like stars, and then they aren't there in another plate. Now, one could imagine any number of things that this might be. So Beatrice and friends have done some analysis on this and found out that when the area being observed is under the shadow of the Earth, they all disappear. And when they're in the light, they all show up, which seems to imply that they are, in fact, real physical objects that are reflective. This is a good video to get up to speed with what Beatrice and friends are studying. There's also a great UFO podcast, the best named UFO podcast, WTUFO, which has a nice little analysis of the 52 wave I would recommend. Also in 52, President Eisenhower wins the election. Well, President-elect Eisenhower wins the election, which creates a problem for whoever recovered the things from Roswell and decided what they were going to do with them. They're going to have to explain that to the incoming president. Now, this is the Majestic 12 briefing for Eisenhower, or at least one page of it. This is one of these contested documents. It's not clear exactly whether this is real or not. The reason, of course, that it's contested is because if it is real, it's a smoking gun, right? So the basic claim is that after the Roswell incident, President Truman gathered a group of 12 people, called the Majestic 12, and they were in charge of figuring out what to do with the storage and study of these unusual objects. A couple names to pay attention to are Hillenkoetter, we'll see him in a minute. Twining, we'll see him in a minute. And Forrestal, we won't see him in a minute because he very suspiciously died. And it's one of those conspiracy theories in the UFO community that he was killed because it was important for keeping a secret for some reason. This, on the other hand, is a well-attested to document. This is an internal CIA memo shortly thereafter. This is from the CIA's director of scientific intelligence to the director of the CIA. At this time, the reports of incidents convince us that there is something going on that must have immediate attention. Sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. Again, when they're not talking to the public, they're very clear about what's going on. It's only when they're talking to the public that they're using their Mussolini-style propaganda script. We actually have radar information of one of these incidents. We don't actually have a lot of public radar information. This was just declassified a couple of years ago. So this little thing right here, that little flower shape, that's 7 UFOs flying in formation. We actually have an animation of this, which I will show you. There they are. Look at those little UFOs. This is a fun one. We'll talk about the New York Times articles in 2017. This is sort of how we got to where we are today. But there was a New York Times article in 1960, way back on page 30, between these two advertisements, called Air Force Order on Saucers Sighting. The Air Force has sent its commands a warning to treat sightings of unidentified flying objects as serious business directly related to the nation's defense, it was learned today. An Air Force spokesman confirmed issuance of the directive after portions of it were made public by a private flying saucer. The new regulations were issued by the Air Force December 24. In this exact interview in the New York Times, Hillenkoetter, allegedly Majestic 12, definitely the first director of the CIA, it's time for the truth to come out in open congressional hearings. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. To hide the facts, the Air Force has silenced its personnel. This is the first CIA director in the New York Times accusing his colleagues of a propaganda campaign and silencing internal testimony. This is the Betty and Barney Hill case, the first modern abduction case. I'm not going to talk much about it. If you want to watch more about it, you should watch the documentary that's being made by Barack and Michelle Obama as soon as it comes out. That's a fact about the world. In 1963, there's an alleged memo. This one's a little bit shadier. We don't quite know who exactly got it and how they got it. But this is a JFK UFO memo. This is to some unknown director internal to the CIA. Essentially, President Kennedy is asking for a classification review of all UFO intelligence files affecting national security. He's initiated something that's redacted and have instructed James Webb, soon later to be named the telescope after him, to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar exploration. It's important that we make a clear distinction between knowns and unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering of their defense and space programs. Now, again, we're not sure that this note is legitimate. And one of the reasons why we have to be very careful about this note is because it seems to imply that one of the reasons why this happened is because he might have been trying to cooperate with the Soviets in allowing the human population to know what UFOs are and collaborating with them on space travel. Here's a cool picture from Costa Rica. Sometimes people talk about how there aren't any good photographs of UFOs and that UFOs only show up in the United States. Double no. This is probably my favorite UFO abduction case. This is Travis Walton. He's a lumberjack who is taken up off the ground, hovers, goes into a flying saucer, and zooms off. He comes back several days later. People look for him all over the place in the meantime, can't find him. And when he comes back, he tells about his adventures. Some people who... adventures is probably the wrong word, but experiences. Sometimes people who go through these experiences, the hills in particular, do not recall them. They have a kind of missing time experience, and then they have to be hypnotized before they see it. And one, for obvious reasons, might be suspicious about hypnotic suggestion, feeding information in ways that you don't want it to be. The reason I like this case is that's not true here. He remembered it without hypnotism. He also had 6 friends with him who testified that they saw him float off the ground and fly away. They were all polygraph tested. They all stuck to their stories. This is a pretty decent case. This is 1990, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Above that little lake, there is an object, an orange object. It's observed by 3 separate observers at 3 different places, and it drops some kind of metal on the ground. That metal is then seen, it's hot, it's collected, and it's studied by Stanford scientist Gary Nolan, who suggests that any straightforward explanation of where this metal comes from is unsatisfying. The Rendlesham Forest incident in England is sometimes called the Roswell incident of England. I'm not even going to talk about it. You should watch this video by my friend Kevin Knuth, who's an astrophysicist who in this talk does a number of good things, including kind of physics calculations of the kind of energy required to pull off these very unusual maneuvers that we're hearing about. But he also does a really nice rundown of Rendlesham. Here's a cool picture from Connecticut. Another of my favorite cases is the Belgian triangle wave. So this is the tail end of 89 and the beginning of 90. Hundreds of people claim that they see black triangles with lights on each corner and a large light in the center, sometimes lights around the perimeter. They draw these pictures trying to explain what they saw. Another reason why this one is so cool is because the Belgian Air Force scrambled 2 F-16s to intercept the radar signature that they see on their radar. And when they get there, the thing flies off. faster than they can pursue. And then they have a press briefing about it because they're not the United States. This is considered by many to be the best UFO photo. This is 1990 in Cavan, Scotland. One of the reasons why it's thought to be so good is because we see that there is not only a strange object in the sky, but that there is a fighter jet either chasing it or flying alongside it as an escort of some kind. In 1993, at the UCLA School of Engineering, Ben Rich, then director of Lockheed Skunk Works, that's the research and development arm of Lockheed that does their most secret projects, including things like the SR-71 Blackbird and the F-117, was their first stealth aircraft, really did say this to UCLA students. We now have the technology to take ET home. No, it won't take someone's lifetime to do it. There's an error in the equations. We know what it is. We now have the capacity to travel to the stars. Again, did this only happen in the United States? Definitely not. The Ariel School incident, one of my favorite cases. There's 62 children at this school in Zimbabwe who claim that they see a flying saucer and a couple of strange-looking aliens come out. They talk to them telepathically and talk to them about the dangers of pollution and becoming overly technologized. They were interviewed by John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist who generally was very interested in these kind of abduction experiences. He was brought in by the military because people kept having contact experiences in the military context, and they wanted to know if they were crazy. So they brought them to John Mack, and he did the standard battery of psychological tests on them and came to the conclusion that they were all psychologically normal people. They did not have schizophrenia or other kinds of psychosis. They just seemed to be traumatized. And in fact, I was talking to one of his research assistants the other day about how this phrase that many of us use, ontological shock, was coined apparently by him. We now tend to use it as the shocking experience of going through reevaluating so many of your beliefs all at once. But when John Mack used it, he was talking specifically about people who were in shock, having gone through a very surprising, overwhelming kind of an experience and shaking and showing kind of early PTSD symptoms. Another nice thing about this case is those children are still alive and you can talk to them. And when you do, they say, yeah, we weren't lying. That's what happened. Virginia, Brazil, 1996. This is the Roswell of Brazil. Another object crashes. There's a being that escapes. Apparently it smells very bad. It gets picked up by authorities and allegedly eventually transferred to the United States. There's a nice documentary about this called Moment of Contact, which you should watch. Phoenix, Arizona, there's a couple thousand people who claim to see one of those, remember that flying triangle-shaped lights in the sky thing that we saw in Texas before? Well, it happens in Arizona, and a bunch of people looking all at the same time, including the mayor, who initially made fun of it, but then later on said, no, I saw it too. There's a cool little YouTube documentary about this, came out just a few weeks ago. This is the Wilson Davis memo. Wilson is this guy, Rear Admiral Thomas Wilson, the intelligence director on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Davis we'll find out about later, but Davis is interviewing him. He's working in some kind of a technological secret classified context. And this is what this document says. Sorry, this doesn't look very good. But basically, Davis is asking Wilson about these kinds of claims, UFOs, Majestic 12, Roswell, crash bodies, etc. And allegedly, Wilson says that this is true, that those organizations do, in fact, exist. Now, Wilson has denied this to this day, which, of course, he would have to do if that got leaked. Strangely, this got leaked because it was in one of the NASA astronauts. Who was this? This is, thank you, Edgar Mitchell's house when he died. And so when they found it, it went public, even though it probably shouldn't have. Edgar Mitchell was very vocal in believing in this kind of stuff and trying to get people to pay attention to it. Probably the best evidenced UAP incident of all time is the Nenix Tic Tac incident in 2004. You probably know about it. There's a great little YouTube video by this channel called Lemino with a bunch of animations. I've screen capped a few of them for today, but you really should go watch the animations because they're free. And also because he talks about a couple of other cases. So off the coast of San Diego, there's a series of, or a little group of Navy ships, including the aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton, which has a very fancy new kind of radar on it. And when they turn on the fancy new kind of radar, they start seeing, again, little patterns of UAP hanging out together, just like that radar signature I showed you from 54. They deploy, or they scramble a couple of fighters out there. 2 F-18s go out. And they intercept. When they get there, they see this white tic-tac shaped object hovering over a strange disturbance under the water. It's about 40 to 50 feet long, which is slightly smaller than the F-18s themselves. One of the pilots, Fravor, engages. They fly around each other a little bit. This thing kind of comes at him and then shoots off. How do we know this? Because his wingman, Alex Dietrich, was also there. She and he have both come forward and are very vocal about what their experience is. We also have Kevin Day, who was the radar operator on the Princeton, who has also talked about this at some length. There's a great little interview between Fravor and Ryan Graves. We'll hear about Ryan Graves in a little while. That's a good first-hand account on what happened. 2011, there's Senator Harry Reid takes an interest in UAP and related stuff. And so he, together with a couple of other folk in Congress, tried to create a special access program called Kona Blue. The point of it was, among other things, to access recovered advanced technology and any earlier assessments to determine threat capability and any potential countermeasures possible against the advanced technology. Collect oral histories from already identified sources, retired military, intelligence, and contract personnel to assist in locating additional recovered advanced technology. Basically, they were trying to get these materials, which are in possession of Lockheed Martin, among other companies, into oversight again and given to places like The Ohio State University where we could study now. This did not succeed. In 2011, there's a Fukushima disaster. This was the nuclear reactor, which was taken offline and started leaking after an earthquake and tsunami. This is another nuclear incident where, again, we get reports of UAP. But this is Japan, so we get a video. If that were the United States, that would be classified. Modern UFO knowledge among the populace began with 2017 New York Times articles. These are primarily driven by journalists Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kane, although Helene Cooper and others helped out in various ways. This is where we get these 3 videos that probably all of you have seen. If not, you should really watch them. They're neat. They're coming from a forward-looking infrared camera. And if you are paying attention to these things, you probably see that various debunkers, Nick West and friends, are trying to give analysis of what this might be other than a UFO. Of course, they're completely ignoring the fact that if you listen to the audio, the pilots are talking about multiple objects on radar. Again, multiple objects on radar over and over again. These are not balloons. These are not misviewed distant planes through a heat signature on the flare that our fighter pilots apparently don't know how to use, according to the debunkers. If you are interested in debunking the debunkers, I encourage you to pay attention to this talk by Dr. Ia Whiteley on the kind of trusting and learning from pilot testimony. It's simply a mistake to suggest that our best fighter pilots could engage an object in a military context with a radar read on it and misperceive something like a balloon instead of what they actually claim to see. These are, of course, our very best visual observers apart from our instruments and in many ways superior to our instruments. This was declassified recently in the past couple of years, but in September 16th, 2020, there was an organization internal to the Pentagon called the UAP Task Force. They were tasked with gathering as much information as they could get about UAPs. And there's a briefing that they gave to NASA. We know this because we have the PowerPoint presentation. One thing that everybody laughs at who pays attention to this is how much of it is redacted. Like, for instance, Which partner organizations are involved? The blank or the DIA? Who could that be? Other things that are classified. Possible stigmas that might be in the air. That's classified. Here's a couple of photographs. Air crew see the UAP. In this case, they photographed them. This is conclusive proof that there is a cover-up. Literally a cover-up. There's a PowerPoint presentation with images in it that were covered by black squares before public release. Those images definitely exist. They're definitely being hidden from you. Here's some more. Other things. Potential explanations are redacted. We can't even know what the options are or how many reports there are. Anyways, this is August 2020. In May 21, on the Late Late Show with James Corden, the musician, I forget what his name is, asks Barack Obama, then 44th President of the United States, about the aliens. What about them aliens? This is what he said. Well, when it comes to aliens, there are some things I just can't tell you on air. There's footage and records of objects in the skies. We don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. They did not have an easily explainable pattern. A month later, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report on the preliminary assessment of UAP. 144 reports. Of these, 80 reports involved observation with multiple sensors. Those are the good ones. In 18 incidents, these objects remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. They also demonstrate a degree of signature management, meaning that they seem to cloak or vanish, which is why they can't figure out what these drones are that keep shutting down all of our airports. This led to a hearing before a House Intelligence Committee in May 17th of 2022 with Ronald Moultrie and Scott Bray. Moultrie was then the Undersecretary of Defense. We know that our service members have encountered UAP. They pose a potential flight safety and general security risk. Bray is Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. We've not had a collision, but we've had at least 11 near misses. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems process radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. The biggest thing that you're looking for is there any indication of an effort to jam whatever sensors that we may have looking at it. Those are not balloons. Balloons do not jam your instruments. Partially as a result of that hearing, a new organization is created, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, abbreviated ARROW, with this lovely little seal, upon which there is Latin. Universum mutao est, vita nostra est quod cogitanis nostra placere est, which is apparently, according to ChatGPT, not very good Latin, for the universe is changed. Our life is what our thoughts make it. UAP hearing number 2. This is the Senate Armed Services Committee. This is the head of ARROW, Sean Kirkpatrick. In our research, ARROW has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics. Well, what are we seeing then, Mr. Kirkpatrick? Mostly round, 1 to 4 meter white silver translucent metallic spheres at 10 to 30,000 feet, with apparent velocities from stationary, which is weird at 10 and 30,000 feet, to Mach 2, which is really weird for a balloon. I want to analyze the rhetoric here a little bit. We have found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity or off-world technology. Well, what if they're coming out of the ocean? Then you wouldn't have any evidence that they were coming from off-world because they were coming out of the ocean. They don't defy known laws of physics. Well, whose known laws of physics? Lockheed's? Who fixed the equations? This is where I come into it. That's the one that Matt, just kidding. This is where David Grush comes into it. But this is when I start paying attention. I remember quite vividly, on June the 5th, 2023, giving a talk on artificial intelligence and the good life in Arizona, when I read this article for the first time, and it's when I started paying attention. Why? Because of this guy, David Grush. David Grush, in this interview, he is a National Reconnaissance Office, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency intelligence officer. He was working with the UAP task force. We were refused access to a broad crash retrieval program. These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, spacecraft, if you will, non-human exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed. When you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true. The reason I am confident in all of these historical documents that I've given you, even the ones that are generally not considered definitely correct, are because they line up with the story that David Grush is telling. Why should I trust David Grush? Why did David Grush change my life forever? Because he was an intelligence officer for 14 years, working at the National Reconnaissance Office, working at Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He got up to a colonel equivalent level rank, which is pretty significant. But he was also a co-lead on the UAP and Transmedium Object Analysis team, which means it was his job to study UAP. That was his job. He reported to the UAP task force. He was assigned to identify all special and controlled access programs. These are called SAPs and CAPs. It was his job to try to trace down where these things were being hidden and why and who had them and how we could figure out what they were. He reported directly to the Deputy Secretary of Defense and was cleared to literally all relevant programs. David Grush is serious business. He gathered information for 4 years from over 40 individuals, including photography, visual documentation, radar, and oral testimony. He became a whistleblower to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, the ICIG, in May 2022. The ICIG's job is to talk to people internal to the intelligence community and figure out if anything shady is going on. And it's his job to make sure that if there is something shady going on, to bring those people to justice. This is a photograph which was irresponsibly leaked by the 45th President of the United States. This is a very, very high resolution image of a site in Iran, apparently from orbit. Who gets to study that? National Geo and Spatial Intelligence Agency. So you can safely assume that David Grush's day job was to look at images of this resolution of the UAP. This is the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community. He determined that Grush's claims were credible and urgent. In addition to Grush's claims that we just saw, he's also claiming that he is experiencing retribution for sharing his information with members of Congress. This is Charles McCullough, the previous Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, who became David Grush's lawyer. So that's two very, very highly cleared intelligence officials taking his story very seriously. Marco Rubio, then U.S. Senator from Florida. Either the reports are true and parts of the intelligence community are keeping Congress in the dark about dealings and what funds are being used for, or the government has praising people in high-ranking positions. Either way, it's a big problem. In order to address this big problem, they tried to create this thing called the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. This tries to create a presidential review board to try to get information about what's happening and get these things back under supervision, kind of like Kona Blue tried to do, so that they can be released to the public, people here at The Ohio State University and beyond. There was a hearing shortly following that, in part in support of it, where we get Mr. Graves, who we've met. No, we haven't. Mr. Grush, who we've met. Mr. Fravor, who we've met. And Mr. Graves, who we haven't really spent much time with. Yeah. What did they talk about? You already know what Fravor and Grush talked about. Fravor's talking about the Tic Tac incident. Grush is talking about the evidence that he has for UFO recovery programs. Graves is sharing some stories from pilots. He now runs an organization called Americans for Safe Aerospace. He was once a fighter pilot. I had experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me today. During a training mission off the coast of Virginia Beach, two F-18s were split by a UAP. The object, described as a dark gray or black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft and was estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. If you've ever watched the original Top Gun, that's real close. You don't really get that close to somebody else and your fighter plane. Unfortunately, the UAP Disclosure Act was shot down by members of the House Intelligence Committee, which is suspicious. Chuck Schumer gave a speech along with his friend, what's his name, Rounds? Mike Rounds. And this is what he said. The U.S. government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. That's wrong. It's really an outrage. The House didn't work with us on adopting our proposal for a review board. It means that declassification of UAP records will be largely up to the same entities that have blocked and obfuscated their disclosure for decades. Chuck Schumer at the time is the Senate Majority Leader, which means he's on the Gang of Eight, which means he has the highest security clearance of anybody in Congress. Mike Rounds. There is who believe information and data that's been collected not just by the DoD, now called the Department of War, but other agencies of the federal government as well, the FBI, etc. We are lacking oversight opportunities and we're not fulfilling our responsibilities well. This is a little bit later. We just jumped from December 23 to May 24. This is Carl Now, an aerospace person. No one knows exactly what he does because it's all super classified. He works at Bell Labs and Lockheed Martin. Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. There is zero doubt. One can imagine situations in which a Lockheed Martin executive might know with zero doubt that that is the case. This is General H.R. McMaster, the U.S. National Security Advisor. There are things that cannot be explained. I don't know what the explanation is for those unexplainable things, but I will say that there are phenomena that have been witnessed by multiple people that are just inexplicable, but any kind of science available to us. The science available to us phrase, again, is I'm curious exactly what that might pan out to be at the end of the day. People have pondered and joked about how surely this couldn't be true because if President Trump knew about it, he would talk about it. Oh, he did. When he was a candidate in September 24, I've interviewed pilots in the Oval Office, 3 or 4 pilots. They said, all I know, sir, is there was a round object that was going 4 times faster than my F-22, which is a very fast plane. They've seen things they can't explain. I agree. UAP hearing 4. This is House Oversight Committee. Now we get Gallaudet, Elizondo, Schellenberger, and Gold. I know you're getting tired. I'm getting tired too. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but let me highlight a couple of things that are said that are important, in particular from Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who was under the Trump administration, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere. In the 1980s, on a nuclear-powered submarine in the North Atlantic, the object, which is underwater, exhibited the characteristic of a Russian torpedo in terms of its speed of movement and closing rate with the submarine, and then it slowed and followed the submarine slowly in its wake for a period of minutes, and then rapidly exited the scene. Nothing that we know of in technology could replicate that. This is Lou Elizondo, formerly in charge of ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. He was one of the guys who helped get those FLIR videos declassified and into the New York Times. There's definitely enough data to suggest a relationship between sensitive military installations and some of our nuclear activities, also some of our Department of Energy sites. The vehicles we're talking about are performing in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs. That's a lot of Gs. That's an unreasonable amount of Gs. This is Michael Schellenberger. He's not speaking on his own behalf. He was a journalist speaking for a then anonymous whistleblower who later became public, whose name is Matthew Brown. Matthew Brown claims to have access through his intelligence job to information like this, a roughly 13-minute high-definition full-color video of a white orb UAP coming out of the ocean, approximately 20 miles off the coast of Kuwait. The orb is joined by another orb. A large equilateral triangle UAP suddenly appears directly over the ships, 3 by points at each bottom corner, observed to slowly rotate on its horizontal axis. There was one more hearing in 24. This is Senate Armed Services Committee, and this is the second director of AARO, John Kozlowski, who appears at first to be following the path of the first director. To date, AARO has not discovered any verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial beings, activity, or technology, because we're not sure if they're coming out of the ocean, and if they're out of the ocean, they're technically not extraterrestrial. We will not foreclose on any explanation for UAP prematurely, and we'll continue to follow the science and data rarely lead. This sounds suspicious. We're not going to tell you what it is if we don't know what it is, or if we don't want to tell you that we know what it is. But then he did something very cool. This is the first time when an official U.S. government person is speaking on behalf of the U.S. government to the public and shares two truly anomalous cases. A law enforcement officer in the western United States observed a large orange orb floating several hundred feet above the ground. As he drove closer to investigate, he saw a blacker-than-black craft about the size of a Prius. As he got within 40 to 60 meters, the object tilted up at a 45-degree angle and then shot up vertically at what he described as 10 to 100 times faster than any drone he'd ever seen. And it did so silently. Just as it left his field of view, it emitted intensely bright red and blue dots that illuminated the inside of his vehicle as brightly as fireworks or street flares. When he returned to the location, there was no disturbance on the ground where the object had been hovering. In the southeast United States, two government contractors were leaving a U.S. facility around 9 a.m. when they noticed a large metallic cylinder, about the size of a commercial airliner, hovering stationary in the sky. They also observed a bright white light surrounding or emanating from it. The craft remained motionless for 15 to 20 seconds, and then it suddenly disappeared. The fact that an object of that size could remain stationary without visible propulsion and then vanish is what made this case highly anomalous. Now we're getting real recent. This is January 25. Jake Barber claims that he's a helicopter pilot who it is his job to go on sites and pick up UAP that are on the ground and retrieve them and bring them to military contracting facilities. Here's an instance that he talked about. Essentially, it was a flying disc with what looked like 8 delineated sections. We did recoveries with these 8 gons, which is not an octagon because it's a disc with 8 sections. 8 gone. There was more than one that made its way to the ground on this particular operation. Once it was just me and that object between the pick and the drop, I felt like something was inside of me. I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit I've ever been possessed by. I think it was invited to land by the psionics team. There was certainly a desire to explore the idea that perhaps UAP could be summoned and persuaded to land, all by deploying people with psionic abilities. Here's one of the reasons why people like me suspect that this secret is being kept a secret. It's because to tell the public what's going on is going to fry your mind. How do you get these things? You get your psionics team. You get your group of psychics to go sit out in a field and then try to get it to come down, and then it does, and then they get them, and then they bring them to Lockheed. And sometimes when you pick them up, you feel this overwhelming sense of love. Oh, we also got a video, not from him, but from a journalist at the same time, of a pickup from a helicopter of a large egg-shaped object. Barber also talks about encountering and picking up and carrying large egg-shaped objects, although I don't think this is supposed to be a retrieval that he carried out. There's a video of this, you can watch it. This is a really big deal. This is April 22nd of this year. Harold Malmgren did an interview with Jesse Michaels. He was a presidential advisor to JFK. He may have stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was a young man at the time who was sort of tasked by JFK to handle some of these grumpy old warmongering generals. A few months after this series of episodes, the Missile Crisis, Los Alamos, Richard Bissell, who worked at the CIA and then also at NRO, called me and said, there are things you need to know. He briefed me on otherworld technologies. He said, this is real. We don't know this phenomenon, and we don't know what the Russians and Chinese know. He wanted me to understand the multiplicity of powers in play and how this subject sat beyond normal control. I directly handled UFO material that fell out of the plume of Marshall Islands nuclear test. A little after that, UAP Disclosure Fund ran an event in Congress. This is not an official congressional hearing. This is just some Congress people are there. And then various people are invited in. Avi Loeb, this is a Harvard physicist who's been making a lot of noise about Atlas, Free Eye Atlas, potentially being something anomalous. He also was the guy who gave us the hypothesis of the room temperature universe. That's him. That's Gallaudet. You know Gallaudet. He's the ocean guy. We need to talk about Eric Davis. Remember the Wilson Davis memo? That guy who was interviewing Admiral Wilson? This is what he said in this event. He now works at NASA's Breakthrough Propulsion Program. The world's biggest governments have had the occasion to recover craft. These programs are even more sensitive and more well hidden than the Manhattan Project, hidden from congressional oversight using shell companies. Inside one of these craft, they couldn't recognize any propulsion or power systems. We've speculated the energy is teleported to the craft from a remote source. There are multiple species. People are familiar with the Greys and the Nordics. Others resemble reptilian or insectoid-type humanoids. This is standard in the UFO lore, although very surprising to hear from somebody publicly with the kind of clearances that Eric Davis seems to have had. Christopher Mellon, once upon a time the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. This is like right underneath cabinet level position. He is basically in charge of all intelligence. There's a large and growing body of evidence indicating that at least one alien civilization has found Earth and is monitoring us, perhaps even seeking to influence the trajectory of our development. One more big event and then we're done. UAP hearing number 6. This was just a couple of weeks ago. This is House Oversight. Now we get 5 people on the stands. This is getting... They're trying. I'm going to go just quickly through a couple of them. Nusatelli is an Air Force security officer. Boeing contractors reported a massive glowing red square silently hovering over 2 missile defense sites. After a little while, it vanishes over the hills. Another incident. I heard my friend screaming, "It's coming right at us." Moments later, I heard them say it had shut off and it was gone. When I arrived on the scene, I talked to 5 shaken witnesses who described a massive triangular craft, larger than a football field, that hovered silently for about 45 seconds before shooting away at impossible speed. Alexander Wiggins, he works on a U.S. Navy ship. Still to this day, he's active duty. A self-luminous tic-tac-shaped object emerged from the ocean, linked up with 3 others, and all 4 disappeared simultaneously with a high, synchronized, near-instantaneous acceleration, no sonic boom, etc. These observations were multi-sensor and recorded inside whatever that is, with time location overlays visible on the source frames. This is an investigative journalist, George Knapp. In the early 90s, I met Russian defense officials who confirmed the USSR secretly ran what was likely the world's largest UAP investigation. An order went out across the military to collect every sighting, witness statements, physical traces, thousands of reports. Many routed through the KGB, then into an analysis program called Thread 3, which sought to replicate the observed technology. This is last week. Dylan Borland, he also testified in Congress, but there's a little more information in this interview that came out last week. The most recent one, October 2nd, was just last Thursday, Friday. I'll read 3 things from him and then we'll be done. Summer of 2012, I see a white light pop up from the NASA hangar about 100 feet up and stop. As I start walking toward it, the light flies across the flight line to me, and a 100 to 150 foot equilateral triangle appears right over me, about 100 feet above and 100 feet in front. The triangle had black metallic paint, 4 lights, 1 on each corner, and a larger center light, and the whole outside had this yellow transparent glow, pulsating like a lava. My cell phone gets incredibly hot, completely freezes and shut down. I'm under it 3 to 5 minutes, no sound. Then the center light flashes 2 or 3 times and it shoots to commercial jet level in seconds. I feel static electricity all over my body and smell a strong lightning thunderstorm. It pauses at altitude and then goes out due east over the Atlantic Ocean. Borland has clearly had more experiences than he's allowed to talk about. This is one of the things that these people in the programs have to do. They are very heavily classified, Manhattan Project level security, which means if you break the rules, they kill you. Like, it really is that serious. How do I know that? I've spoken to somebody who was in a secure environment, who was in a briefing, and was saying something publicly that was a little too close to it, and got a call from the White House and said, "You are aware that this clause applies to you?" And they said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Lethal force authorized." So, yeah. Hypothetically speaking, let's say I claim I saw Bigfoot. So we know he definitely didn't see Bigfoot. Because if he said that, he'd be in trouble. But he saw something. Running around the Nevada test range, and I saw Bigfoot outside the Starbucks. Probably not a Starbucks. And Bigfoot was wearing a U.S. Air Force uniform. If I said that to AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee, and I draw a nice picture of Bigfoot in a pretty Air Force uniform, whoops, I forgot to change that one, AARO comes back and says, hey Dylan, you talking about Starbucks is unclassified. You talking about Bigfoot in that military uniform, you're never to say another word about that. That's what AARO did to me. They classified everything I brought forward. This is testimony that is consistent with other testimony that we've heard from other people, but from a guy testifying before Congress, that there are aliens in American military uniforms. That there again. I was put into a hypnosis. I was put into a hypnosis biofeedback program. Let me pause on this. This is the claim that as he talks to people who have other clearances, have similar experiences, he starts getting retaliation. So not to the public. These are other people with classifications who have had similar experiences. I was put into a hypnosis biofeedback program where once a week I had to go to the VA and be hooked up to a polygraph type machine while they flashed images, an Afghan child with a gun to a butterfly, and I had to count backwards from 100 by 7. If I got the number wrong, like 93, 86, and I said 77, they'd start screaming at me, honking an air horn, and I'd have to restart. In my med ward, they denied I ever had the surgery and took me out of the Air Force as a 10% disabled veteran. I had to fight the VA for over 10 years for them to even acknowledge that I'd had the wisdom teeth removed. When he had his wisdom teeth removed, he had complications and he can't feel his jaw. Later, the VA accused me of faking a police report and wrote in my official medical records that I'm a liar, prone to delusions. To this day, those entries have hindered me. I just want you to remember the first director of the CIA, Hillenkoetter, talking about how, in order to keep this a secret, they're suppressing the testimony of the people who know it. How do you do that in a country like this? Well, you do it like that. Technically not torture. I want to claim that UFO disclosure has already happened, but no one's forcing you to look. At this point, it has all been said. It's all been said in official context by people who have the knowledge, who could share it, who are well justified in saying what they're saying. So it's time to get curious. Like, there's a line beyond this, right? The line that everybody feels like they want them to cross, where somebody comes out and says, here's an alien body on 60 Minutes. But the second they do that, everybody in the world has to deal with the fact that the United States government has been carrying out a Mussolini-style propaganda campaign, suppressing its own people for almost 100 years. And that's going to get complicated. So they're not wanting to do that. They're just letting it leak out. Now they're sort of officially saying it little bits at a time. But it's probably all real. If you want to know more, you want to get curious, these are the 3 books I recommend most. This is Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée. He talks about connections with the ancient stuff. I didn't talk about the ancient stuff. It definitely connects to the ancient stuff. All the religious texts, all the weird stuff, and all the texts from the sky and the sky people and the various mythical blue beings that show up, and definitely connected. American Cosmic by Diana Pasulka, similarly talking about, she's specifically a religious scholar working on this stuff. How to Think Impossibly by Jeffrey Kripal at Rice University, a philosophy guy. Kripal, I think, is the one who has the most generally coherent view of how all this stuff happens. And he's so mind-bendingly weird that you're going to have a hard time with it. How come they're not telling the public? Because the truth is so weird that you're not ready for it.